anything you eat is going to at some point result in an increase in insulin as your body tries to deal with that energy. So insulin is really just trying to clear fuels out of your bloodstream, right? Your pancreas is like this fuel pressure sensor. And when fuels in the bloodstream are low, your pancreas pumps out a bunch of glucagon to break all your stored energy down, your fat, your protein, your glycogen, whatever, and raise fuels in the bloodstream. And then if fuels in the bloodstream are too high, your pancreas pumps out insulin to try to get the fuels lower in the bloodstream by shoving everything back into storage, either storing glucose as glycogen, storing triglycerides as fat, or amino acids as protein. So insulin is really just trying to clear the fuels out of your circulation. And if you eat carbs, insulin goes up a whole bunch. If you eat fat, you don't really notice it, but what's happening is that all that fat eventually enters your circulation, has to be stored, and insulin is going to go up slightly. And then what you do see is like chronic baseline insulin, like your insulin level when you wake up fasting in the morning, is really influenced by overall fatness and over fatness. So if you're super lean and you're dieting down really hard and you shrink down all your fat cells, all the fuels in your bloodstream are really low, your insulin level's super low. But if you're over fat and your fat cells are too full and the fat's constantly coming out of your fat cells and into your circulation, then your insulin's chronically high, even when you're fasting, just trying to clear that fat out of the circulation back into the fat cells that don't want it anymore. And then when you eat more fat on top of that, and get even more over fat, you have even more fat in the circulation. And that's why your prediabetics have high fasting triglycerides and high fasting insulin and high free fatty acids. And there's just basically too much fat in the system as well. So you can have a really, really flat CGM, but if you're over fat and eating too much fat, you're still going to be insulin resistant. Your fasting glucose is still going to be too high because the cells don't want glucose. Your fasting insulin is still going to be too high because there's too many fuels in circulation. And eating fat's actually going to slowly make that worse. There's just a huge delay so that people don't notice it on their CGM. Your pure carnivore person is going to have this physiologic insulin resistance. So their fasting glucose is going to be way near the upper end of normal versus someone who's just completely carb fueled, you're, fruitarian. Overnight, their liver glycogen falls and they'll wake up in the morning and their fasting glucose is 70, right? So, I might wake up and my fasting glucose is 99, but if I was just purely carb fueled, I'll wake up with a fasting glucose of 70. So we definitely see these big differences in fasting glucose, typically within the normal range, but defining the upper and lower bounds based on high carb versus low carb. And I don't think you can really read too much into that. I also think there's a lot of acute glucose changes that are completely harmless. So if I'm like super lean, very little body fat, all my fat cells are really shrunk down and insulin sensitive, I have plenty of room to dispose of incoming fat, protein, carbs, or any macros. So I have really low fuels in my bloodstream, really low insulin level, really insulin sensitive. But then I go out and do some crazy high intensity interval exercise and sprints or whatever. I might jack my glucose up into the diabetic range transiently, just trying to dump enough fuels in my bloodstream to do what I have to do. But I don't think that's necessarily going to be harmful because I think the overall harms are mostly from energy toxicity, which is way too much fat in your cells and way too much energy hitting your mitochondria. And I think a lot of the damage from insulin resistance is actually this sort of overall energy toxicity that might not happen to someone with acute glucose spikes if they're otherwise not energy toxic, if you know what I'm saying. So I think just looking at the CGM might not tell you the whole story.